Didn't break it yet with my face.
Okay, guys.
Very good. Again, a 3, 2, 1. Hi again, everybody. Tom Pipines with John Dodds, and we're here doing a podcast for you, the Leadoff Podcast. Tom Pipines Show with John Dodds, PipinDodds.com, PipinDoddsSports.com, DoddsSports.com. And we've got it all here, and we especially have the Green Bay Packers in the 100th year, now looking at 2019 and 101. We want to talk Packers day and night, also including other teams, the local teams, the Giannis's of the world with the Bucks, you name it. But right now, Brewers, Marquette, Badgers, local sports, silver lining, human interest stories. Right now, we want to talk Packers, and specifically, what went wrong in 2018, John, with a team that many thought, with a healthy Rodgers, was Super Bowl material?
I thought they were a 12-4 team, but looking back with 2020 hindsight, I can see some serious items that jumped out at me, and I think you can all go back to week 1 when Aaron Rodgers hurt his knee against the Bears. It looked like an ACL, and Kaiser came in, gave up 10 points to the Bears' Khalil Mack, interception return for a touchdown. I have never seen I've been to over 450 Packer games in Lambeau in the press box. I've never seen the press box more quiet than it was. It was like a morgue at halftime, because you could just see that all the media were thinking, the print media, the TV media, nobody's going to read my stories. No one's going to be interested in my podcast or my TV show, because this is going to be a 2-14 team with Deshaun Kaiser at quarterback. But it was just, you could hear a pin drop in that halftime. In the second half, he comes back, and he was about 75%, and he was able to hit Cobb and Allison with touchdown passes, and they won that game. But he was never the same the next 6 or so weeks. The mobility was gone. And the really odd thing, that as he developed as a quarterback after 2009, he always had a sixth sense where he could sense pass rush, and he had pocket presence. For whatever reason, he seemed distracted. It could be the knee hurt him and he wasn't mobile, or the offensive line wasn't good, or it could be the rookie Cobb and Allison were hurt a lot, and the rookies weren't doing what he wanted to downtown, but downfield. The focus was downfield, and he was getting whacked. And in the Buffalo game, he got hit 3 times as hard as I've seen him get hit, at least in 10 years.
And maybe, John, he became too conscious of the pass rush, and he's always extending plays, and he's waving these receivers. By the way, I got to take this job. You're the attorney, you're the smart guy, but now that I'm off television, after all these years, this thing has to go. I've got to get this out of here, loosen up a little bit, and say this to you. Jimmy Graham didn't work out. The tight end wasn't there. Now I feel better. After all those years, I on the TV, we don't have to do that on a podcast, but you look resplendent, so we'll keep it.
Thanks, Pip.
I just don't know if Aaron Rodgers was Aaron Rodgers. I would say that was a big part of the Packers season, but all the injuries. And then the Mike McCarthy dynamic. We have to talk about McCarthy. 13 years, it seemed as if a divorce was coming. The criticism Rodgers levied at his head coach after that Buffalo win. In the end, obviously, the coach was going to go before the player who signed the richest contract in NFL history at about $134 million.
A losing season is extremely tough in the NFL, very tough in Green Bay. And when we covered in the 70s and the early 80s, there were a lot of losing seasons. And there's nowhere to hide in Green Bay. Your only focus, it's a college town type atmosphere. And I always thought, you heard people, the critics say, McCarthy, the game has passed him by. The NFL has caught up with him. Well, the NFL didn't catch up with him in 2011 when they had Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Donald Driver, James Jones, and Jermichael Finley as his weapons. I mean, that was pick your poison, and Rodgers would just come to the line, look at the 5 options, and see who is the weakest DB, because nobody has a DB as a nickel or dime back who can cover your fifth or fourth option. And the Packers had just tremendous offensive power back then. But I think as that degenerated a little bit, and now you had, when Allison and Cobb got hurt and nicked up during the year, then you had to play the rookies. Now, you didn't quite know what the rookies would do. Look at Robert Brooks back in 92. He was a rookie. He didn't show well until 95, late 94. It takes them in the West Coast offense 2 or 3 years to learn it, to be on the same page as the quarterback. I remember Donald Driver did something that endeared him to Brett Favre, where he would come into quarterback meetings and Favre would say, "Why are you here?" "I want to see what you see. And I want to know," and Jordy Nelson used to do that too. So when Rodgers was extending plays, Jordy Nelson knew what he was looking at, and he would find the open spot. And you didn't see that with EQ St. Brown, and you didn't see that with Valdez Scantling, and Jerron Moore, the fourth round pick from Missouri. People tell me that the other players would tell me that he's the best route runner out of all the rookies.
Jamon Moore,
but he can't catch the ball. He's
right. A lot of drops.
But there's a lot of too much thinking going on.
Well, let me do this, because we can talk forever in a day. But let's get back to McCarthy and Rodgers. Injuries, a major problem, but also Ted Thompson's drafts. The last 3, this is a Packer Hall of Famer who did a fabulous job. Everybody talks about Ron Wolf. Well, their credentials are pretty equal, and Ron Wolf's in Canton right now. But we will get to this. I want to come back to McCarthy, the dynamic there that you saw. Had the coach basically gotten to a point where he couldn't get through to a player who seemingly knew it all?
Rodgers is extremely smart. He can remember every play that happened in his entire career. And the interesting thing, he's more effective at home because there's less noise. And he'll take a play from McCarthy, and he'll go up to the line of scrimmage, and he'll set the offense. He'll look at the defense, usually in a no-huddle type situation. He'll set he'll see the defense. He'll set the offensive line blocking. They usually have 2 plays called. He'll decide whether it's right or left that they're going to run. It's either a pass. He's got various options. I just wonder how many times McCarthy called a play and Rodgers changed it. And nobody will ever say that. The offensive lineman won't say it. Or Rodgers would, you could see this, and he was just unhappy with what the play that was being called. And I interview since 1982, I've interviewed opponent players in the opponent locker room. When the Milwaukee Journal asked me to do it way back, Gary Van Sickle in 1982. And so I get a feeling for what the other team says. And they've said that Rodgers was really tough to deal with because as they're changing, in previous years, as they were changing the defense, Rodgers was adjusting and he had a smile on his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. So this year, defenses tried to attack him where they would show different looks at the near the center snap. So he would make adjustments, but they would make adjustments against him. And they were much more aggressive doing it. And I think what happened was with the rookie wide receivers, and even Graham the tight end, he didn't seem to be on board. He was hurt a lot, couldn't practice a lot. I didn't think they were really efficient anytime during the year.
Very disappointing. I think Packers fans, and I believe number 12 felt there would be magic with Jimmy Graham, but he seems to have lost a step. I mean, he basically is catching the ball and falling down, and this is a superior athlete. So there are so many things. I do want to talk about Thompson, the draft. Again, the injuries decimated this team. But for the new person in, the coach, is Aaron Rodgers coachable? Is Aaron Rodgers ever going to return to the form that made him not only a Super Bowl champ, but a 2-time MVP and arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time?
That's a question that's back to the future because that's what was being asked in 2005 when Ted Thompson hired Mike McCarthy. Brett Favre, can you handle him? And the trouble with an iconic quarterback is that when he's younger, you can structure him. But then he gets to the point where you can't. You defer to him. When Holmgren, who treated Brett Favre with, here, you do it my way or I'm going to get in your grill, when he left, Ray Rhodes came on and said, Brett, he deferred to him. Would you like to do this? What do you think if we went long? Yeah, let's go long. That's where I
And
went.
Mike Sherman to a degree as well, wouldn't you say?
Mike Sherman also. McCarthy comes in, looks at all of Favre's interceptions for the last 5 years, sees that 80% of them were late throws over the middle. And he said, you have to stop this. And he got on him pretty good. And it took probably 2/3 of the 2006 season, and finally Favre bought in, and they won the last 4 of the 2006 season, and then went 14-4 in 2007, where Favre carried them, but carried them within a structure. And Mike Holmgren had some tough time corralling Favre. It wasn't until Favre hurt his ankle, and Holmgren said, let the offense help you. Don't feel like you have to make all the plays. Let us help you. Look at the options. And when he couldn't move, he limited himself. He disciplined himself. That's when he got it. And I remember interviewing a Tampa Bay Buccaneers safety, and he just looked at me and he said, oh boy, I could see him in his eyes going back, and I saw Joe Montana going through the progressions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but with a better arm. And I thought, he said, boy, they're really going to be good over the next 10 years.
I remember Favre constantly looking at video late in life. I mean, at the beginning, his God-given talent carried him. We know that he was kind of a goofball. He would admit the same, and a lovable one, and a lot of discipline. As we take it to Rodgers, is there someone who can challenge this fella and teach him in some regards, I think, to teach him to undo some bad habits, be it with footwork or what have you, that caused the inefficiency that we saw at times. You could take the 25 TDs and the 2 picks and over 4,000 yards again. That's fine and dandy. But in between those numbers speaks to the lack of fundamentals. So is there somebody out there, this next person coming in, who can make it right, and will Aaron listen and do what Favre did and adjust, and therefore hopefully retain that level that he once had?
You're absolutely, that's the $64,000 question. But one of the things, and I know Mike Clemens from 1250 The Fan pointed this out, he had heard that Aaron Rodgers hurt his wrist in the Buffalo game. So there was a couple things going on. With a bad offensive line and with a bad wrist, he was throwing a lot of short things. But when you have a bad offensive, short passes, when you have an offensive line that's weak, you can't have fundamentals and footwork. And I think that was an issue that he had. He also didn't seem, he's had 2 clavicle injuries over the last, say, 4 or 5 years. He didn't seem to be as strong. His arm didn't seem to be as strong. And I'm wondering if he couldn't work out it like he could. Mm-hmm. He does yoga. He does all sorts of things.
And he wasn't practicing much during the week with the knee, right?
Right.
So he was overthrowing wide open receivers. At times he was underthrowing. That's a good point. My feel is that the next head coach is going to find a way to get through to this guy and say, as someone pointed out on the radio not too long ago, stop being a point guard out there on a basketball team and direct it. Start playing football, get back to what made you so very great. And if he can do that, in the past we all know that Aaron Rodgers was able to hide the warts of the Green Bay Packers. Then he gets hurt, and he misses the majority of the season. It's Katie bar the door. But this past season, he wasn't able to elevate the team, to take the team to another level, to carry on his shoulders. You have to hope that he'll be able to do so going forward. And for me, for my money, he will be able to do that if he can stay healthy. Now, back to Ted Thompson and the drafts that really decimated a team that was at a high level from the beginning of time once he took over and had McCarthy with him.
He had the magic touch. He essentially gutted the Packers. When he took over, they were a playoff team in 2004. They had just lost to Randy Moss in that, when Randy Moss did the gesture in the south end zone that we all remember.
What gesture was that, John?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, the interesting thing about that is
Moon over Lambeau.
It was definitely wiping himself against the padding of the goalpost. But the interesting thing was Tony Dungy was the one that defended him. Nobody defended Moss on that. And the reason why...
The gentlemanly, one of the nicest human beings God ever made, Tony Dungy.
Bart Starr and Tony Dungy are the nicest people I've ever met in sports. These guys are unbelievable. But Dungy defended him because he said that when the Tampa Bay bus left Lambeau, they would get a salute from the Packer fans where they would be mooned by hundreds of people as they were going off. So he thought that was
only one of the reasons that you Packers fans are the finest. Okay, so Thompson has 3 bad drafts. There are issues perhaps with his health. Great man, lots of respect for him. I think, again, a Packers Hall of Famer on the cusp for Canton. It probably won't happen because they didn't get a second Super Bowl championship, and had they been in Seattle and won that NFC champ, who knows? But certainly it hurt the team, and now it's up to Brian Gutekunst to try to make up for it, and he's got a lot of work to do. How do you think that Goody did in his first year from the standpoint of the draft and also some of the free agents we brought in, taking into account that number 80, Jimmy Graham, did not work out?
Yeah, it's too early to tell, depending on when rookies get hurt, and young players tend to get hurt a lot. You really can't judge them. But if you look at, I think they really hit something on Alexander. I think he's Terrell Buckley, but as good as Terrell Buckley thought Terrell Buckley was. That's how good Alexander is. But he got hurt. He missed probably 6 games this year with groin pulls, leg injuries. Nothing major, but just luckily minor injuries. So when you're then you go in the second round, Jackson was the cornerback from Iowa. He hit the rookie wall probably about November 1st. It was just, some of these guys are not used to playing all these games. And he was impressive up to a point, then he had a target on him. But the interesting thing when I look back at the Packer season last year is when Kevin King played, this was a 12-4 team.
Well, see, there's the point. And to Josh Jackson, some people seem to think that he might be better as a safety. You know, he was a big interceptor. There are those who would tell you that he needs to tackle. Leroy Butler said to me recently, I don't know if he likes to tackle, which isn't a good thing. Your point on Kevin King, but as Mike McCarthy always said, you got to be available and you got to be accountable. When he was on the field, he was terrific, but he's missed so many games. And you Packers fans say, you had a chance to get T.J. Watt with his dozen sacks. Instead, you pass him up, and you go to Vince Beagle, who we all love, the Wisconsin Badger. He didn't, he's cut from the team. He winds up in New Orleans playing bit roles, perhaps on special teams. So, Kevin King, is he going to be one of these guys with talent who just can't stay on the field? He's a slight build. That has to be concerning. But I agree with you. When he's in there, he's been very good.
I think it's Gary Ellerson that always says this, and it's true. You can't help the club when you can't get out of the tub. And that's exactly King. They beat Chicago in week 1. That's a playoff team with Kevin King playing. They're ahead of Minnesota in week 2, 21-7. And then he hurt a leg muscle. They put House in, and the Packers tied 29-29. When King was playing, they're in Los Angeles, playing the Rams head-to-head the entire game, ahead in the fourth quarter. They're ahead in the New England game, the same thing with King there.
Aaron Jones had a fumble. We all know the Ty Montgomery fiasco, which led to him being cut, taking out a kickoff preventing Aaron Rodgers from having an opportunity to lead his team to only a field goal to win the game. So they were close in so many ways, and yet if it isn't for Rodgers' magic against the Bears, they could have lost the 49ers game. So this was not a very good team, injuries notwithstanding. Mike Pettin, I think, was Houdini in many respects. So they only had, at one point, 2 or 3 preferred starters who were in there. But this is a team that needs more good players. Let's face it, I think knowledgeable Packer fans, you'll agree with this. This is not a very good team. They need to hopefully not rebuild, but reload. But they better reload in a hurry the way the Saints did after 3, 7, and 9 seasons. And now they could very well be going to the Super Bowl this season as we speak today.
Mark Murphy pointed that exact thing out in his press conference why they fired Mike McCarthy. He said, look at what New Orleans did in the 2017 draft. They drafted shutdown cornerback Lattimore from Ohio State. They got Ramczyk, the offensive tackle from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Kamara, the great running back. So they did a terrific job and got an infusion. They were, Sean Payton's a genius now, and Mike McCarthy isn't. But Sean Payton was 7-9 for 3 successive years, and he was on the brink until this infusion of talent came. So this is a talent issue. There's no question about it. And this draft is very good with defensive players. And so I think if they have a good draft and they get some health, I think there is hope that they can right this ship. But getting back to your comment, you're absolutely right about Rodgers. The way Holmgren finally got through to Favre in '95, that I'm here to help you. We're on the same team. I'm going to structure it so you can be successful. The way McCarthy did structured Favre in 2006, Favre finally bought in and had a great 2007. If the new coach can come in and get a coordinator where A-Rod thinks, hey, I don't have to make every play. They're going to structure and help me, so I just have to worry about Aaron Rodgers in this structure. He'll be a lot better off.
Gutekunst seems to me to be a mix of Ted Thompson and Ron Wolf in the sense that he's not afraid to go after free agents, whether they work or they don't work. You mentioned Tony Brown. He hasn't been too bad or wasn't too bad in the defensive backfield. He's got problems on the offensive line, and he's had all sorts of injuries, and he is going to have to remake that O-line for Rodgers and company, and he'll probably have to go out and get a couple of veterans to do so. Teddy T, as we know, would have gone to the draft and then maybe have to wait a year or two. Aaron Rodgers is going to be 36 in December of this current year, 2019, and you can't wait. I mean, the time is now. You got to seize the moment. So will we see, in your estimation, John Dodds, this man be very active in the free agency as well as with the draft, and he has lots of picks, and we'll talk about that in another podcast.
The draft is very good in certain positions this year, but not good in offensive line. So I think they're going to have to go free agent. The one guy who might be the biggest tease I've seen in Green Bay is Spriggs, the offensive tackle. He has all the talent in the world. One scout told me he thinks he's Mike Ken, the Hall of Famer for Atlanta, the offensive tackle. But I don't know if he starts off so poorly in training camp, and then the last couple of years has gotten hurt. He's come back, and then out of desperation, when he really needs to show it, he does flash. And the second time he came back this year, he was actually above average. And so how do you fit this? Is it a young player who's getting it, or do you have to bring in an old player it's a Simon Sure?
Yeah, I agree. He did flash a bit, and he's got great feet, as they say, and that's obviously very important for an offensive lineman. It helped Mark Tauscher out become a Packers Hall of Famer, as we know, the Wisconsin legend. But there's so much to talk about, and we'll get into that in the draft. But as we put a wrap on this first podcast, and by the way, we're delighted to be at Enders here in Heartland with owner Pat Enders. It's a great place. We hope to be here again. We are Tom Pippin Show with John Dodds. We're Pippin Dodds on Sports. We're Dodds on Sports. Again, as we said before, anything but late for a meal, which neither of us is, certainly not me. Put a wrap on the 2018 season. The biggest reason for 6-9-1 ending with an embarrassing loss when they gave up at Lambeau Field to the Detroit Lions. That one was that or Arizona, which was worse. The whole season was difficult to watch.
Well, I thought the season was lost when Bakhtiari, the offensive left tackle, got nicked up against Minnesota. That's when I knew that this team I thought they could still make the playoffs until the Minnesota game. So the Detroit game didn't bother me at all. In fact, I don't necessarily say they gave up, but if they had been a horse, somebody would have put it down, because they had so many rookies. They picked 17 players up. Because just look at their defensive line. Kenny Clark was gone. Daniels was gone. Wilkinson was gone. And here is Lancaster showing something, but then he severely hurt his elbow in the game. So here you got the practice squad guy at 50%. So they just didn't have the manpower. What's unfortunate is that they did show something against the Jets. Looking back, it would have been great if they hadn't. They'd have the 8th pick instead of the 12th,
right?
the 12th pick.
Yeah.
But I think it's Rodgers got hurt, and then you look back, Clay Matthews, your second best player or your best player in defense, and he's still your best pass rusher. And we can get into that a separate podcast. I think they should still, at a lesser salary, see if he wants to return. But he was totally messed up with those referee calls earlier in the year, and that cost him the Minnesota game. Seems like there's referee calls that maybe they weren't good enough, but a lot of challenges all seem to go against the Packers. Against the Rams, there was 3 challenges with catches on the sidelines that went against the Packers. There was a big one in Seattle that went against them that forced field position.
Well, and then, as you know, Mike McCarthy didn't challenge one time when he should have challenged.
At New England,
he didn't go
or Seattle. Yeah.
Right, and
yeah,
he didn't
yeah.
go for it on 4th and 2. I mean, you put it in the hands of a defense. As you say, there's a lot to talk about. We know what the past is the past, right? It was a horrible season by Packers standards, and that window is closing on Aaron Rodgers. So what do you do from here? They're stocked in terms of having opportunities to rebuild or reload through the draft and maybe free agency. So a lot of pressure on Brian Gutekunst, who I would say was okay in his first year overall. I like him, but this is the time right now. You know, it's put up or keep quiet. And I think for a change, you and I maybe should keep quiet. Say thanks, everybody, for being with us on our first podcast, and we look forward to another one coming your way very soon. Really appreciate your company.
Silence is golden.
What do you think, fellas?
It's good. I like it.
You all right?
Spell Pipins, though. Honest to God, it's the craziest.
Okay.
People come up to me and
Yeah.
do you find that all the time?
Oh,
Or
gosh, yeah.
2 P's or
I used to
3
get mail
Ps
that
or-
said Todd Piping, T-O-D-D, Todd Piping, well-known sports director at Fox 6. And again, Pat, most people thought it was John Milano.